All right, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system today. Hang with me, we're going to get started. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be talking about the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to refer to it as the ANS. We're going to compare and contrast the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. As you can see here, I've kind of drawn out a little diagram, right? So how is the ANS different from the somatic nervous system? Well, the somatic nervous system, we have a little more control over it, right? So we have our sensory nerves, and it also controls our motor functions, okay? Which that is our skeletal muscle. Whereas the ANS, we don't really have any control over it whatsoever. It's purely just based off of what's happening around us, what our body needs at the moment, things like that, okay? So we're going to get started. I've kind of written things out a little bit just for the sake of time and helping the flow of things here, flow of our discussion. So to get started, we're going to talk about the differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions here. Okay. So as you can see, and you may already know, the sympathetic nervous system is often referred to as the fight or flight response to things. So people often refer to it as, if you're being chased by a bear, you know what's going to happen physiologically to your body, right? I said running with the bulls just to be different, but same thing, right? You're going to have an increased heart rate. Your pupils are going to dilate. Your bronchioles are going to dilate. You're going to have an increased blood flow to your heart and skeletal muscles, and you may even experience goosebumps. Okay, these are all in response to something happening where you might have to act fast, right? These aren't prolonged responses, but they're to help you act fast. Parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is known as the rest and digest. So what that means is it's going to decrease your heart rate. You're not needing to run. You're not needing to get out of someplace fast. You're not needing to fight, right? I think of it as you're sitting down watching your favorite show, eating nachos. Okay, so your body doesn't need to be in a high alert state. So it'll decrease your heart rate, constrict your pupils, constrict your bronchioles. An important thing to note is that your parasympathetic has no innervations or control, I guess, is what you could think of it as, in your blood vessels or your skin. Okay, that's purely an SNS innervation. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. Now, the autonomic nervous system, each effector organ, is innervated by two neurons, right? Both the PNS and the SNS. Now, they often have opposing effects. Kind of as you can tell from above, what we discussed a little bit up there, they're pretty opposite of each other, right? One increases heart rate, one decreases heart rate, one dilates pupils, one constricts pupils. It's just kind of the same thing all the way down. So besides the blood vessels and skin, these organs are all innervated by both the SNS and the PNS, and they have opposing effects on the body. Okay. Now, these nerves that run from the SNS and the PNS, they're made up of a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. Okay, so for the sympathetic system, we have a really short preganglionic neuron, and we have a really long postganglionic neuron, where the opposite is true for the parasympathetic neurons. We have a long preganglionic neuron, and we have a short postganglionic neuron. As you can see right here, if it's a solid line, that means it's myelinated. If it's a dashed line, it's unmyelinated. So myelinated is going to take it faster, right? We've talked about that when we were talking about action potentials. They decrease capacitance and increase RM. So that's important to remember with the sympathetic: short preganglionic neuron, long postganglionic neuron; parasympathetic, long preganglionic neuron, and a short postganglionic neuron. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the SNS. The SNS is, you're going to find these nerves, they're going to be in this range right here, the T1 to L2 range right here. Okay, this is kind of a crude drawing of a spinal cord, but we're going to work with it. Okay, so that's where you're going to find all of your SNS nerves and neurons. That's where they're coming out of. They're coming out of the lateral horn. In your T1 through L2. Okay, so what they're going to do is you're going to have these preganglionic neurons here that just come right out of the spinal cord, and then they synapse in what this is called the chain ganglia. Okay, now the SNS has two types of ganglia that it synapses in. We just mentioned one, the chain ganglia. The other that we'll talk about in just a minute is the collateral ganglia. Right? Okay, so I'm going to keep going now. So it comes out of the lateral horn of the spinal cord, and it synapses with the postganglionic neuron here in the chain ganglia. Okay? And then from the chain ganglia, that postganglionic neuron is going to take that to its effector organ. Now, there are 4 routes that our SNS takes. So we can have them form a spinal nerve. The spinal nerve is going to innervate your skin, blood vessels, hair, and sweat glands. Okay. So basically, the peripheral parts of your body that aren't centered, right? I guess. The other route that this could form, where it synapses in the chain ganglia, is the sympathetic nerve. Okay. The sympathetic nerve innervates your thoracic cavity. Okay. And then, so these both, as I kind of mentioned before, they both synapse in your chain ganglia. Chain gang. Okay. The next route that they could take is they could form a splanchnic nerve. Okay, and so right here, I've kind of drawn a splanchnic nerve. Okay, this is the splanchnic nerve right there. So what happens is they come out right there. Okay, they're coming out of the spinal cord, and then they're going to go through the chain ganglia and form a nerve here. Okay, so it's not synapsing in the chain ganglia. We don't see that. It goes through the chain ganglia, and then it kind of meets up with a whole bunch of others, right? And it forms this one nerve. And then they all travel together into what's called the collateral ganglia, right? Which is what we talked about up here, this guy. Okay, so we see that right here. This is our collateral ganglia, and this is where they then synapse, and then our guys leave from there, right? And they go and innervate whatever their effector organ is. Okay, I'm not going to get into what all the effector organs are, but the splanchnic nerve, I will say, innervates the abdominal pelvic area. Okay, so everything in your abdomen and your pelvis, things like that, those are what those are going to go to. Okay, and then this fourth pathway, we have kind of a unique situation here. It's very similar to the splanchnic nerve, but it goes, we have a preganglionic neuron that goes and runs straight to the adrenal medulla. Okay, and so that's this green line right here. Okay, so I kind of tried to show that it forms this splanchnic nerve, but instead of synapsing here in the collateral ganglia, it comes out and it goes all the way down to our kidney, where it synapses right on the kidney. Okay, goes right onto the adrenal medulla. Yeah, so again, it's very similar to the splanchnic nerve. It just doesn't synapse in the collateral ganglia. It keeps traveling and goes right there. So now I'm going to talk about the PNS a little bit here. Now, its type of ganglia, it only has one type of ganglia. It just has a terminal ganglia. Okay. So now, if you'll remember up above, we talked about how the PNS has a really long preganglionic neuron, or nerve fiber, and then it has a really short postganglionic neuron. Okay, so it's really important to remember that 80% of your PNS fibers are found in the CNX, so your cranial nerve 10. So the vast majority are coming straight from here, and then they're leaving and going to their effector organs. Okay, so that's why they're all super long, and then they go straight to their effector organs, and that's where they synapse, and then it's just a really short one, and then they cause their affecting. They release their neurotransmitter and cause the effector organ to do whatever it is that these neurotransmitters cause it to do. Okay. So again, 80% of PNS fibers are found in the CNX, or that's also known as the vagus nerve. Okay, so That's an important part of that. It's also important to remember that this is known as the craniosacral sacral division because our PNS fibers are coming from the cranial aspect part of our spine, and then from the sacral part of the spine. Okay, so those are really the only two areas that they come from. So there are 7 nerves coming from the PNS, and there's 14 in the SNS. All right. The PNS, it really is just a long fiber that comes basically all the way to the effector organ, synapses with its postganglionic neuron. The postganglionic neuron then releases the neurotransmitter directly onto the effector organ, and that's about it. That's really the only route it has. There's not anything too crazy. So the PNS is quite a bit more simple than the SNS in terms of routes and everything. So now I want to talk about the different kinds of neurotransmitters that we see being released by our postganglionic neurons. So first is norepinephrine, NE. I'd say this one's most common, but I'm going to get to something here in just a second that kind of gets rid of that. But anyways, the next one is epinephrine. And then dopamine is dopamine, so I'm not going to write anything there. And then the last neurotransmitter that we see in the ANS is acetylcholine. Okay, and then what's cool about all of these guys is they're basically just adrenaline. Okay, so now we have these different effectors, or different receptors, excuse me, that these neurotransmitters bind to. Okay, so easy way to remember is cholinergic receptors, they bind acetylcholine. So cholinergic, choline, they sound the same, acetylcholine, right? So cholinergic receptors bind acetylcholine, where adrenergic sounds like adrenaline. So then you remember, you've got your norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine. Okay. Now, there are different kinds of receptors, ionotropic and metabotropic. Your ionotropic, they are basically ion-gated channels. Ion or ligand-gated channels. So something binds to them, and they open. Okay, metabotropic, they're G proteins. Okay, so this causes a cascade. I'm not going to get into what G proteins do. I'm sure I'll get into that at some other point, but I'm not going to do that tonight. Anyways, now we're going to move on to these G proteins. I guess I should mention that our ionotropic receptors are N2, or N1 and N2. N stands for nicotinic. It just means that nicotine was what they used to figure out how those receptors work. Now I want to talk about these G proteins. Okay, we can categorize these a little bit. So some of these G proteins act on IP3 in some, which leads to an increase in calcium output. Okay, so these are going to be alpha 1, M1, M2, M1, M3, M5. So again, these all act on IP3 which leads to an increase in calcium. Okay. Now, good thing to know here, all of the M's are cholinergic. They all respond to choline, acetylcholine, ACH. Whereas all of these guys, they are adrenergic. So they do all those guys. Okay. So when these kinds of neurotransmitters are released, these are the fellers that respond to these neurotransmitters. These are the receptors that respond to acetylcholine. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense there. So now we're going to be talking about these G protein receptors. Again, IP3, increased calcium. Okay, alpha 1, M1, M3, M5. Now we also have just the evens. I'm going to scoot in here a little bit. So now we're looking at alpha 2, M2, M4, D2. Okay, all of these guys, they decrease camp. So they're inhibitory, right? Whereas odds, so we're going to do D1, beta 1, beta 2. Beta 2 is a super kind of confusing. I'm going to try to explain it difference to our rules here. And then beta 3. Okay, all of these guys, they increase camp. So they're excitatory. They're EPSPs. So kind of the rule of thumb here. Odd is an EPSP, so it depolarizes. Evens, IPSP, inhibitory, hyperpolarize. But again, this is not a hard, fast rule because beta 2, that's an even. However, it's not over here. It increases camp, and yet it is still inhibitory in the lungs. It causes bronchial dilation. Okay, but if you're thinking about it in a fight or flight response, do you want to be able to breathe more or less? You're going to want to be able to breathe more, so you're going to want your bronchioles to dilate, right? But for whatever reason, that is an inhibitory response for beta 2. So it's what we want, but it's also inhibitory. Kind of weird, but I just really think about when you're in a situation that you need to act fast, what do you want your body to be able to do? You want to be able to increase your blood flow. You want to be able to breathe better. You want to be able to see better. You want to be able to run faster, hit harder, whatever, right? So beta 2 is this really kind of an out there part for us, but so I want to talk really quickly just about the SNS and the PNS when they are synapsing. Okay, so here we have a pre and post ganglionic neuron. Between pre and post ganglionic neurons, we always have ACH as our neurotransmitter, and N2 as our receptor between the two, right? So ionotropic, ligand binds, stuff rushes in, okay, and that causes an action potential to be propagated down. Okay, and that is for both the SNS and the PNS. All right. So for the PNS, different, super long, pre, short post, but again, it has acetylcholine between the pre and the postganglionic neurons. Okay, so that is similar between the two. Difference starts with the SNS. The postganglionic neuron releases a norepinephrine as the neurotransmitter down here. Okay, and so that's why we need our alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, D1, D2, right? All of these are adrenergic receptors. Adrenergic receptors respond to adrenaline or norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, okay? So that's important to remember. That SNS releases adrenergic neurotransmitters. I don't know a better way. They release catecholamines. These are all known as catecholamines. Okay. So that's what SNS does. The PNS, when its postganglionic neuron releases neurotransmitters, it's acetylcholine again. So it's going to activate M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. Okay, so because we learned up above, M1 through M5, they are cholinergic receptors. Okay. So acetylcholine is released. These guys are the receptors for that. There is one really random example for SNS. It does not always do this. There's an example where it will release acetylcholine, but that is only for generalized sweat glands. And then that will land on an M odd receptor. Okay, so that's kind of the one really random exception to the SNS. But that's basically the ANS system. That's how these things are running. I hope everything kind of made sense. I appreciate you watching and rolling through all this with me. It's a lot of information.